My name is Eddie Mandry, Director for Africa and Middle East at Yale. On behalf of the university, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this session. It's the first webinar in a series of virtual events on the theme of African women as pillars of resilience. We're grateful to the hundreds of attendees who've registered from across the globe. And this event is also an extension of the Yale Africa Initiative and is made possible thanks to an enduring partnership between the Women for Africa Foundation and Banco Santander. The Yale African Women's Leadership Network is currently comprised of 54 remarkable leaders from 29 African countries. And this event follows previous in-person gatherings in Accra, in Addis Ababa, and most recently in Lagos, Nigeria. Every single day, African women shatter glass ceilings and chart new pathways by surmounting insurmountable, and through their courage, sheer determination, and sharp sense of purpose, they bring change to happen. Across Africa, many women are leading the charge for socio-political change and economic transformation. The women with us today are at the forefront of these efforts. To kick off this event, I'm delighted to introduce the Honorable Maria Teresa Fernandez de la Vega. She is the founder and president of the Women for Africa Foundation, and she's also the president of the State Council of Spain, and was the first woman in the history of Spain to occupy the vice presidency of the government. She's been a champion of this program, a strategic partner in our efforts, but also a partner to many women across the continent as they work towards transformative change. Maria Teresa, we're absolutely delighted to have you. I hand over to you.
Pues muchísimas gracias, Eddie. Buenas tardes a todas. La verdad que estoy emocionada y feliz, ya lo he dicho antes, pero quiero reiterarlo ahora, de poder estar con vosotras y poder compartir este espacio que es para mí un privilegio. Son muchas las cuestiones que en estos momentos difíciles tenemos que plantearnos las mujeres. Y es muy importante para mí, para la fundación que presido, conocer vuestras opiniones y vuestras experiencias sobre tantos ajustes que en estos momentos tenemos que hacer todos los ciudadanos del mundo. En un momento de crisis en que las mujeres, además de manera particular, tenemos que hacer lo que estamos haciendo, no solo resistir, sino que ser auténticos pilares de resiliencia, como lo estamos siendo, y al mismo tiempo ser capaces, como también siempre hacemos, de reinventar nuestras vidas y la de nuestras familias y de reconducir y transformar el temor, el miedo y todo lo que nos está ocurriendo en fortaleza y en alternativas, en espacios diferentes y detenidos en donde podamos ocuparlos para iniciativas y alternativas que nos den la posibilidad de seguir continuando hacia adelante en una vida sana y viable con nuestro planeta, donde nos está ya avisando, y esta pandemia yo creo que es un aviso que tenemos que tener en cuenta, que hay que llevar a cabo iniciativas de desarrollo sostenible. Y la verdad es que yo no quiero utilizar más tiempo porque el tiempo es oro, que se dice, y por tanto quiero escucharos, sobre todo escucharos, atenderos, escuchar vuestras alternativas, escuchar también vuestros deseos, vuestras ansiedades en un momento tan difícil como este, en el que estoy segura que después de esta reunión vamos a salir con muchas ideas y nuevas iniciativas. Así que estoy ya deseando oíros y mil gracias de verdad por vuestro esfuerzo y por vuestro compromiso. Muchas gracias también a la Universidad de Yale, Eddie. Muchas gracias.
I see. Thank you very much, Maria Teresa, for those very kind words. I would also like now to introduce our moderator for the next part, for the beginning of the program. And it's a pleasure to introduce Biola Alabi. She is a Yale World Fellow from the class of 2014. She's an entrepreneur, filmmaker, investor, public speaker and host, television host. She's founding partner of Biola Alabi Media, and she's one of the biggest jobs in Africa in terms of her role spearheading Mnet Africa prior to starting her own company. We're delighted to have her moderate this conversation. And over to you, Biola. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eddie, for that wonderful introduction, and Maria for really setting the stage for this conversation. I also want to say once again, thank you to Yale for inviting and putting this together, but really to our esteemed panelists for being here and for the work they continue to do to move the agenda for women forward on the continent and actually and globally. I'm really excited to be here. When I saw the names, I said, not only are these my mentors from afar, but also role models for me and for many women across the continent. So once again, I want to say thank you for joining us and thank you for being here. I'm going to try to make sure I speak slowly because we are translating in multiple languages. And I will also ask the panelists to keep that into consideration as they also do their presentations and respond to questions throughout the session. At the beginning, I'm going to just sort of say a couple of things and then I'm going to start to introduce the different panelists. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was a huge concern around inequality globally and how inequality was going to affect different parts of the world, especially low-income countries. But what we then have seen turn around is actually the impact it's had on high-income countries and also low-income countries. And a lot of it has been because of lack of leadership, lack of more women voices at the table. And I was looking up some things, and I remember when the Director General of the World Health Organization said that the biggest challenge facing us is actually not the virus, but the lack of leadership and solidarity around the virus. I'm looking forward to us having a conversation and reviewing some of the successes that other countries have had, especially women-led countries, looking at some of the themes that have enabled and created enable environments where they've had these successes, and look at how those can be applied across the continent, but also looking at some of the weaknesses around our leadership that will be bigger challenges, not just today, but in the future as we deal with this crisis, but other crises. So I'm excited and really looking forward to this amazing conversation. So once again, thank you for having me. And without wasting any time, we're going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker. She will be presenting a 5-minute sort of opening statement or a presentation, and feel free to share your screen if you have slides to present. Niela Chaben. She is the Secretary of State for Women and Children and Family Affairs in Tunisia from 2014 to 2015. She also serves as the Dean of Faculty of Legal, Political, and Social Science, University of Carthage in Tunis as well. And she's the president of the Tunisian Association for Constitutional Law. She's a fierce advocate for women and women's rights and has been at the forefront of advocacy in Tunisia. And I'm really excited to have you. I'm going to hand over to you to give us some opening statement about this crisis and future crisis and the role of women on the continent. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour Maria Teresa. Je suis ravie de vous revoir. Je suis ravie aussi de revoir Eddie et de faire la connaissance de toutes ces dames de qualité. Comme vous l'avez dit, nous traversons une crise vraiment sans aucune commune mesure. Et la Tunisie, c'est un tout petit pays au nord-ouest de l'Afrique. Et durant cette crise, si on veut parler d'abord en termes de chiffres, le Covid a peu touché la population par rapport à d'autres pays. Jusqu'à aujourd'hui, il y a eu, je dirais heureusement, 1300 cas uniquement de personnes atteintes. Et en nombre de morts, parce que malheureusement, il faut aussi parler en nombre de morts, il n'y a eu que 50 morts en Tunisie. Et cela est peut-être dû au fait que la Tunisie très vite a fermé ses frontières et elle a très vite aussi pris des mesures de confinement très sévères. Pendant 2 mois, pratiquement, le pays a été mis sous une cloche. Il y avait très peu de mouvements. Et c'est ce qui a permis vraiment de freiner la propagation de l'épidémie. Mais durant cette période de confinement total, ce que nous avons remarqué, c'est l'apparition sur la scène publique de femmes médecins hautement qualifiées et dont la parole était écoutée et suivie. Peut-être pour la première fois en Tunisie, le grand public, le public le plus large, a fait la connaissance de personnes, de femmes médecins, spécialistes dans leur domaine et qui ont joué un rôle très actif dans la gestion de la crise. Aussi bien pour la prévention, mais aussi quand il a fallu expliquer pourquoi il fallait rester chez soi, pourquoi respecter les mesures de distanciation et tout cela. Et ça, je crois, c'est la première fois que la parole de femmes expertes a été aussi bien écoutée et acceptée. Parce que avant, il y avait certaines femmes, il y avait des femmes qui apparaissaient sur la scène publique, mais le respect avec lequel cette parole a été accueillie et acceptée, je crois, c'est un événement qu'on n'a jamais connu auparavant. Et je pense qu'en termes de droits des femmes, la crise aura permis en Tunisie de marquer encore plus et de donner encore plus de la parole, de la valeur à la parole des femmes dont on reconnaît expressément la qualité d'expertes dans leur domaine. Dans les moments, dans la vie quotidienne, c'est vrai que la Tunisie est souvent citée en modèle en matière de droits des femmes. Mais vous le savez, il y a une différence entre les droits consacrés, reconnus par les textes, par la Constitution, et la pratique. Vous pouvez avoir les meilleures lois du monde. Si la pratique ne suit pas, ça ne sert pas à grand-chose. Et je pense qu'en termes d'évolution de la société, cette crise qui est dramatique pour tous les pays du monde aura permis de reconnaître, du moins dans l'expérience de mon pays, de reconnaître véritablement la place des femmes en tant qu'expertes, écoutées et ayant une grande influence sur les décisions qui ont été prises. Je pense vous avoir donné un tout petit peu l'ambiance générale en Tunisie en matière de gestion de cette crise. Et si vous voulez, un peu plus en avant, nous parlerons de questions plus précises.
Thank you for that. My finger and the mute button is not as fast as I would like them to be. At the end of this, thank you for that, and thank you for really giving us a context of what's happening and the role that women are playing, especially as we all know, globally, you're seeing more and women on the front line and also at risk because of their role on the front lines, but also so many other things that have been exposed to the lockdown through the weaknesses of systems, and also how they're putting women at risk. We'll have that discussion a little bit later when we have our discussions. I'm going to hand over the potential candidate who has been our girls. She is literally the person that makes all of us up in Nigeria, raise our voice, continue to inspire us, lead, and we have no excuses. So once again, Auntie Obi, thank you for all the work you do, and thank you for being.
Hello, is there anyone there?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, lovely. Okay. Thank you very much, Biola, for the introduction. And my greetings to all friends, and especially our friends from Yale, as well as Maria Teresa and her team. I think that the topic, African women as pillars of resilience, is a quite auspicious one for us at a time like this. And so I do want to frame my intervention on this from a macro perspective of looking at what really do we need to do in order that the resilience of the African women, which is well documented in literature on development, can become something that's more focused, sharpened in this era of a new normal and a potential next normal in rapid follow-up of the level of risks that the world must now just attune itself to. Number one point that I'd like to make is that the matter of gender inequality was already a problem on our continent way before the crisis, the global pandemic. And with this, it meant that in terms of the political space, in terms of economic opportunities, and in terms of human productivity, health and education, there was gender gap. As a matter of fact, a study by the World Economic Forum, together with other partners into gender gap globally, has said and had stated that for 2020, our continent would need 95 years in order to close that gap. So with that kind of a data in mind, you can just imagine what the gaps in these different indicators that are measured was before the pandemic. Now, with the outset of the pandemic, it meant that in terms of issues bordering on human productivity, health, and education, we have to look at the impact that it has had on the African girls and women. We have to look also in terms of the economic opportunities, the impact that it has had. And then we have to look at the political and public space for leadership. How much of decision-making do we say the African women having to make at a time where crisis is having to be managed? So that's my second set of issues on the table. The third set of issues is that understanding that the crisis is a crisis of life and livelihood, and seeing that these three indicators that measure parity of gender really have worked against the opportunities for women. It then means that the matter of resilience of the African woman is not sufficiently rewarded because with more of that resilience needing to be shown in a time of crisis, they actually have had more of the impact in terms of lost opportunity for economic progress, for improvement in their human productivity, for space in decision making. So what are the things that the resilience should lead us, an understanding of in resilience that is rewarded with greater involvement and engagement of the African woman? What should it lead us to? It should lead us to identifying the barriers and the obstacles that have made women to be on the margins of these important issues of economic opportunity, of political representation, of human productivity, human development, and therefore productivity. And so three things that must be on the table as the African woman looks at the days ahead during the course of this pandemic, as well as post-pandemic. We need to think parity. How do we achieve parity across this spectrum of indicators? We need to think pipeline. How do we design interventions that enable us have a strong pipeline of people, of women participating in these three spheres where we're lagging behind? And then how do we design policies that are friendly to converting the current resilience of the women, whether in terms of the leadership they are showing as being the ones who are still managing to eke out a living, to put food on the table, especially for the people, you know, that are stuck in poverty. And then the policies that would enable us remove more and more of the barriers that hold back women from being effective participants in the process of community and national leadership. And my final point before we then go to questions is that the leadership style of women has been seen to be evident in the effective way that women have managed the pandemic across countries. In the case of Africa, we do have the Prime Minister of Namibia, who is the leader of government there, reporting to a president. But the way she has aligned her, aligned her skills, you would say that it's a global thing. The leadership styles of women, the leadership style of women, tell you that women are collaborative, women are participative, and they are problem solving in their orientation, and very humble to learning, and therefore willing to make mistakes. They encourage dissent, and they allow informed information from multiple sources to be available to them. Now, if this kind of a style has helped in saving lives and brought the kind of cautionary approach toward managing economy in time of crisis for a continent that has most of the crises on the face of the earth, it is important. I mean a political crisis, conflicts on the face of the earth. It is important, therefore, for us to see that the more of our women that are making decisions, being participants in building society, the better ultimately the resilience of the African woman would reward the continent, because the issue of gender equality is not a female issue. It is a social, economic, and political imperative. Thank you very much.
Biola, you're on mute.
Told you my fingers were not as fast. Thank you for that. I'm now going to head over to Igba Osman, who is the founder of Karama, a movement to end violence against women and deliver sustainable, inclusive peace and democracy in Africa and the Middle East. Igba has made it her mission to elevate the voices of women, raising their profiles and developing their skills as peacemakers and leaders. Karama is the culmination of a career that has included reconciliation and peace building in her homeland of Somalia and campaigning for justice and recognition for Korea's comfort women. Thank you and welcome to the panel today. I'm going to hand over to you to do your opening statement. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm having trouble with my computer. I'm sorry. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Great. Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Yale and Mary Trace, and it's a pleasure to be here. I would like to quickly just go over 3 points. The first point is when we asked the question, what links Germany, New Zealand, Taiwan, Iceland, Finland, Norway, Denmark? There are, of course, 2 answers. They all have been recognized for their effective response to the global health crisis, and they are all led by women. I think we have all seen and shared the images on social media celebrating these women and the leadership they have shown. But these countries have not done better in responding to the crisis because they are led by women. There is a more fundamental link between the 2 answers. A country with a more functional culture of politics and governance will both more likely to deal, will be more likely to deal well with crisis and be more likely to be inclusive in leadership. Leadership is not just about the president or prime minister, the CEO or director. It's about systems. It is about culture. A politics in which women or minorities are less likely to succeed, in which artificial, systematic, and cultural barriers favor candidates from particular groups and hold back others, is a dysfunctional politics that will have knock-on effects in leadership, effects that have been exposed ruthlessly by the crisis. The lesson then is not as simple as if you want good governors, elect women. It is that we must foster a politics that is inclusive, in which women and minorities are able to demonstrate their skill and leadership. But that is not to say there aren't easier lessons to draw from the crisis. It is not, I think, a coincidence that the three of the countries with the worst crisis responses are the US, UK, and Brazil. The governments of all three are led by men who like to present themselves as absurdly, performatively macho. All three have been found desperately wanting in the crisis. The second lesson I would like to draw is that women are already leading work on the ground. They know where the need is, and that is why it is so important for them to be involved in leadership. In the early stages of the crisis, we spoke to women across Africa and the Middle East to understand how they were responding to the changing situation they faced. We heard directly about the remarkable innovation and dedication of women's groups. They were increasing the operations of the helplines to assist women suffering from violence in the family, using their existing networks to produce personal protective equipment for their own organizations and others. The women in our network have untold experience of dealing, unmet needs. They have been preparing for this crisis by dealing with crisis on a daily basis. COVID was not the only crisis these women were already dealing. They were dealing with war. They were dealing with all kinds of crises. So they are ready and prepared to deal with another crisis. And that's why it's so important to have women involved in the task force, in the commissions that are dealing with this crisis. Women's crisis in the region have the networks, they have the credibility, and they have the expertise. More than that, they have shown the leadership to sustain their organizations through an extraordinary time. These are the leaders we need to look in for crisis to respond. But the third point that I would like lastly to say is we must remember that inclusive leadership is essential. Otherwise, who do you hope to lead? Like many, I have been hugely inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement, the energy, the compassion, the determination that have focused by Black Lives Matter. They have been vital, and I use that word deliberately. It's a movement fundamentally about life. It is also a movement that African Americans had to create, to build from the ground up, because there was not a space for their messages in the existing progressive groups. Now, the movement has created perhaps the largest and most focused mass mobilization for racial justice in America in 50 years. And many progressive groups, and especially women's groups, are essentially irrelevant to it. If you, as a movement, will not make room for marginalized groups, whether that's the women, ethnic minorities, young people, LGBT, or whoever, then don't expect them to make time for you. We have seen brave whistleblowers come forward to detail the racism, exclusion, marginalization they have experienced at coming groups, as well as national and global institutions that have presented themselves as committed to ethnic and gender equality. This failing has been all too obvious to me and to my colleagues in the region as a network of activists dedicated to addressing the inequalities in our own societies. Of course, we have recognized the inequalities that existed even in the movements that have sought to ally with us, the movements that are nothing of the sort, stale, establishment, talking to no one but themselves. The message for all is clear. Get relevant or get out of the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, I am going to hand over to Kawala, who is the founder of Stand Up Cameroon, who is also a former political candidate in Cameroon and who has been on the front line of fighting for women's rights. She's an entrepreneur, she's a strategist, she's everything and anything you want. And she is also a voice for youth and for innovation and inventing a new Africa. Ka, I'm gonna hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, and it's a huge pleasure. Thank you so much to the Yale Network for giving us the opportunity to connect. Hello to Maria Teresa, to my big sister Obi, to whom I'm also sending a big hug from Cameroon in this difficult moment for her. I hope you got the one that I sent already earlier. And hello to my friend Hibak. Nice to see you, nice to hear your voice. I almost feel like I don't need to say anything. And it's a pleasure to meet both Nela and Biola, who we're meeting for the first time but are part of the same network. Like I said, I feel like Hibak just really hit the nail precisely on the head. I'll go through a couple of slides to visualize, I think, almost the same points for everybody. Next slide, please. So for us in Africa, COVID-19 is a crisis, that's for sure, but the true crisis in Africa is a crisis of governance. When the examples that Hibak has just given, whether it is Norway or New Zealand or Germany, the truth is that they faced a crisis with governance systems that enabled them to be proactive, to be creative. They had a repository of trust between the citizen and the government. In Africa, COVID-19 arrived in countries where there was a lack of trust between citizens and governments. I don't know how it is in the other countries, but today in Cameroon, at least half of the citizens do not believe that the government is telling them the truth about COVID-19. So how can you fight something when people don't even trust the leaders who are supposed to lead that fight? We are telling people to wash their hands in this virus. We are telling them to go and get tested. We are telling them to take treatment on a continent where 4 out of 10 Africans don't have access to water, on a continent where health systems are so poor in many countries that people avoid going to the hospital. And this has been the case in many countries with COVID-19. And we're telling them Africa has innovated a lot with COVID-19. We've seen ordinary people come up with either treatments or ventilators or different kinds of equipment to test for COVID-19. But all of this innovation is going nowhere because countries have not put in place the systems to actually capture innovation, test it out, and bring it to scale to face the problems that we have. And as far as women are concerned, next slide, we have always, African women have always throughout time stepped in to cover this governance gap. I looked at that word resilience for a long time because I wonder whether we are not too resilient. We are always picking up the mess that our governments and our leaders are leaving behind. We don't have water. African women provide water for their homes, whether they have to go kilometers to get it, whether they have to build wells within their own compounds, they end up providing the water. We don't have hospitals and social systems to care for the sick and the elderly. African women step in and they fill that gap. We don't have social safety nets. African women, in spite of everything, are making sure that everybody eats, that everybody has a minimum, and they are literally killing themselves to be able to do it. And at the governance level, as has been mentioned, Obi also mentioned this, we see the case of Namibia, but we see other mayors and local officials. Every woman leader that I know is conducting a campaign right now, is distributing masks, is stepping in to inform and educate the population about COVID-19, where government has been unable to do so. So women continue to step in and fill this governance gap. Next slide, please. So I think that we must not stop at resilience. I think that it is good to be resilient, but being overly resilient means that our governments continue to fail us and we continue to remain at survival level. Being resilient means we must get to solving the systemic issues. It means, one, that we have to get rid of bad leadership. There is far too much bad leadership on the African continent. And in moments like this, where we have a crisis that is literally killing people, we see it very, very clearly. Very few African countries have been able to step up to the leadership challenge and provide solutions in this crisis. And it means replacing the bad leadership with that inclusive leadership that Hibak was just talking about. We must remember as a world, not just as Africa, but as a world, that we are here today because we have not listened to women. Women have said, put the human being at the center of governance. Put the human being first. Make decisions and put budgets to care for the human being. As a world, we have stepped away from this kind of focus and we have focused on arms. All of our governments have bigger military budgets than anything else. We have focused on the economy. So we have, billionaires around the world today, and now we're having to call on them to see if they can find a vaccine here or there. These people whom nobody has elected, they're not responsible for anybody. We need to replace our leadership with inclusive leadership that goes back to putting the human being at the center. And that in Africa means addressing the systemic fundamentals. Water. Everything in Africa should stop until we get water, electricity, a school, and a health center to every African. It means healthcare, education, and it means embracing this extraordinary talent of science and innovation that our young people have, that our women have, that they're using every day to fill that governance gap which is there. We have to bring that innovation into systems that can solve our problems on scale. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you all for your statements and your observations and also giving us context of what's happening in different territories. One of the things that is evolving is around gender equality, it's around inclusive government, and it's also around the barriers to changing some of these systems that we have in place. One of the things Hikba said was really the success that female leaderships are having all around the world. And some of the reasons they're having such success is because of societies that elect women tend to be a reflection of the greater society. Two of our panelists have run presidential campaigns. Ka is talking about replacing bad leadership. Antiobi, I know that is one of your major pillars, is around leadership and how we get good leadership. There are tons of barriers to entry around female presidential races. I would like both of you very briefly to talk about those barriers and how do we start to knock them down, and how do women stay resilient in systems that are built to not allow entry. I'm gonna go to Auntie Obi first, and then Ka, I'll come to you.
Yes, thank you, Biola. I think that the number one thing is women have not in any way understood the power of networks. And so everything about politics is about the network that you build. We do have networks, but we have networks that don't talk to themselves. And so we need to connect all the female networks and build a dynamic political base, because right now women do participate in politics only as far as giving the votes to those who run, and mostly often giving the votes to men who run. The second thing is that women are not even primed for considering political and public leadership as a priority in their life career. And so you have a tendency for women to self-select themselves outside of political and public leadership. And so it's almost an anomaly to find a woman like Ka or myself saying we're going to run for the presidency of the country. So it means that we need to start very early to prime our children. Our girls must be primed to understand that they have a stake in society and that leadership is gender neutral. They can lead. And then the third point is that the structural issues that constitute the obstacle are so numerous. They range from political, in other words, the way that political parties and the political system is structured, to economic. Women don't have the deep pockets that politics requires, to social barriers, where the society sort of perceives women as being people who should lead only to a certain level. And so they find it okay for a woman to lead at a certain level, but at no other level higher. And that's changing. And it's a matter of us, facing the system and demanding for the legal policy and other kinds of institutional reforms that are necessary to improve the readiness of systems to accept women as leaders of society.
Ka, coming to you, if you have anything to add to that.
I think, Biola, that in the short term, it's very important for women in these moments of crisis to realize that political power in a country remains that single power that can influence everything else. Women, African women are hugely active in the economy, in associations, in NGOs. And I think it is important that we bring this message forcefully to say that it's great to have a health NGO. It's great to have an education NGO. It's great to be a woman who is in your community, helping that community to build a well so that they can have access to water and so on and so forth. But the only sphere that solves problems on scale for millions of women, for millions of men, for millions of children is the political sphere. And we must get more women to directly engage with politics. I always say a lot of women don't like politics because it is dirty and corrupt and sometimes violent and so on. The only thing is we cannot depend on the men who built these political systems to change them. If we want change, we have to engage with these systems and we have to transform them. So I think there's a very clear message to send to women, African women, women all over the world, but African women especially. Our continent is in crisis. COVID-19 will go, but we will be left with all the other crises of our continent. And so as women, if we want to move out of crisis survival mode and to live the lives that are truly ours, we must engage with politics.
Thank you. Hikba, I'm going to come to you, and Nela, and I'm going to come to you first, Hikba, on if you want to stay relevant, you have to stay in and you have to get in. One of the things Ka said is actually that there's almost too much resiliency among African women. How do we move from resiliency to action to result? How do we get out of this place where people know we're going to continue to be okay, we're going to continue to survive? How do we move away from this label of resiliency to actually getting into more into action and actually getting what we want as women on the continent?
You know, politics is something, it's a luxury for many people, because if your life depends on you are continuously busy trying to keep your children safe, get them education, health, it is really exhausting. I don't know about the resilience part. I think many people are depressed and they don't know how to deal with it. It's just basically, you just have to, you know, I think you have to be in a, you know, in a comfort zone to think about politics. So it is really those women who already are in politics, you know, to explain to the people the reality of it. What does politics mean at the end of the day to your real life, to your food, to the school, to the this? They really have to understand the relevance of participating, because you are a citizen. Women need to understand you are a citizen, and the government is executives that are working for you using your tax. So I think we have to come down from that level into really creating masses of people who understand the only way they are going to be heard is to be relevant to that vote for those countries that are practicing vote. But even those who are not practicing, you know, democracy as we know it, I think it's masses of people. They can't do anything about masses of people day in and day out sitting there demanding, you know. So being a citizen, understanding that, you know, you can make a difference, having a confidence in your citizenship and in your country, and that really you to value your being. It's very important. I think in the Middle East, in Africa, many people have really lost hope and lost feeling part of a country and a citizen, you know. And I think that's really what's happening. It's not so much as they are not making the effort. They have to look at it and say, politics is a luxury. I need my kids to eat. I don't want to go to a jail. I don't want to be this. It's more complicated just an answer and just getting, you know, involved. But I think it's people like Vega and Ka to make them understand that numbers really count, and that you know, we need women also, because a lot of times women who are in politics are not necessarily coming from the womenist movement. They don't have a womanist agenda. They become relevant to their political parties, so they leave the woman behind. So it's more complicated. We need to be, you know, we have to show the interdependence of those who really aspire to take us out of the mess we are in, and the importance that they have to understand that ultimately they have to answer to the masses. So, you know, I'm glad I'm not a politician, and I wish them all the best, but that's what it will take.
Thank you. Nela, I'm going to just change a little bit my question for you. One of the things and themes that keeps on emerging is around inclusive government. I know that in Tunisia, there's been a huge effort around creating legal structures to make sure that there is gender balance when it comes to legislation. Can you give people context of sort of that journey? And if you have any view into some of the ways that that inclusive government has been able to help in dealing with crisis, and also will help deal with crisis in the future. We'll love just something from you.
Alors, moi, si vous voulez, je vais remonter un peu plus loin que la crise du Covid-19. La Tunisie a connu en 2011 une véritable révolution qui a été menée par la rue. Il n'y avait pas de leader politique, il n'y avait pas de figure de proue de cette révolution. Et ce qu'on a vu en 2011, à partir de 2011, c'est que les femmes sont véritablement descendues dans la rue en très grand nombre. Elles ont été de véritables actrices du changement politique qu'il y a eu en Tunisie. Mais malheureusement, maintenant presque après 10 ans, l'engouement des femmes pour la politique est en train de se réduire très fortement. Et cela est dû, il y a plusieurs raisons. Hein. Il y a d'abord la crise économique et sociale. Vous savez que dans des sociétés en transition, la situation économique et sociale ne peut pas s'améliorer très vite. Et le temps n'est pas le même pour celui qui est en attente et celui qui est en poste de décision. Et donc, au fur et à mesure, ce que l'on a vu en 2011-2012, c'est-à-dire la mobilisation des femmes et leur volonté de s'impliquer en politique, diminuer petit à petit. Et cela est très perceptible au niveau des élections et au niveau du taux de participation des femmes. Pourtant, nous sommes dans un pays où les femmes éduquées, le pourcentage de femmes éduquées est très important. Il y a vraiment une grande présence des femmes dans le domaine économique et social, et cela ne se reflète malheureusement pas dans le domaine politique. Et avec la crise du Covid-19, nous vivons, nous, aujourd'hui, une crise politique et une crise des institutions. Et même si je vais vous paraître pas très optimiste, mais c'est malheureusement ce que nous sommes en train de vivre aujourd'hui, la combinaison de la crise économique et sociale avec une profonde crise politique est en train de dégoûter surtout les jeunes de la politique, que ce soit hommes ou femmes. Or, dans nos pays et en Afrique, nous sommes un continent jeune. Hein. La majorité de notre population a moins de 30 ans. Or, 30 ans, c'est vraiment une population qui est jeune. Or, ce que l'on est en train de vivre et de leur montrer ce que la génération des cinquantenaires, soixantenaires est en train de montrer à ces jeunes n'est vraiment pas le bon exemple. Et moi, je ne suis pas très optimiste aujourd'hui parce que nous vivons une période un peu particulière en Tunisie et dans le monde. Mais cela n'empêche que je pense quand même fermement qu'il faut continuer à encourager les jeunes femmes qui s'impliquent d'abord dans le domaine social et associatif. Parce que c'est le chemin pour arriver à la politique. Beaucoup de jeunes personnes aujourd'hui sont impliquées dans le domaine associatif. Vous, mesdames, vous avez parlé du rôle des femmes pendant la crise du Covid-19, les femmes qui étaient impliquées pour répondre dans les centres d'appel, celles qui organisaient des collectes pour distribuer de la nourriture, pour distribuer des médicaments, pour distribuer des masques, pour faire de la prévention. Il faut exploiter ce terreau-là de personnes impliquées dans le social pour leur faire passer le saut de qualité et passer en politique. Moi, j'ai fait une expérience en politique en tant que membre du gouvernement et après en tant que membre fondateur d'un parti politique. Et vraiment, j'étais très, très enthousiaste au départ quand je m'étais engagée dans l'expérience de la création d'un parti politique. Mais malheureusement, et je crois que certaines d'entre vous qui sont dans la politique le savent, être en politique et créer un parti demande beaucoup de temps. Ça demande, or une journée n'a que 24 heures. Et ce qu'on demande à une femme, on ne le demande pas forcément à un homme. Et on ne peut pas se démultiplier. Je crois qu'il faut travailler, et ça c'est vraiment le travail de fond, il faut travailler sur l'éducation de nos enfants. Il faut véritablement inculquer dès le plus jeune âge aux enfants qu'il n'y a pas de tâches spécifiques aux femmes et d'autres spécifiques aux hommes. C'est à partir de là. Juste je termine par ça.
Pause here because we're going to soon be going to the general Q&A. But before we go, I just have one more question for Auntie Obi. And I wanted to ask you, when you look at a country like Rwanda that has a good ratio when it comes to gender equality. Do you believe that some of the success they're experiencing in dealing with the crisis has to do with that? And in what ways, if you think so, please, thank you.
Yeah,
And then
so in many, in outside of the continent, even besides Rwanda, we have seen that these countries where we've got the female leadership in presidency or as prime ministers have done better. And I did list some of the reasons that they've done that. Primarily, they've done well because of the leadership style of women. When you are in a crisis, there is the necessity to communicate effectively. Women are great communicators, so they've done very well in communicating the crisis to their citizens and getting legitimacy for the actions that they have had to take. So the public has endorsed a lot of them and more willing to listen to the leadership and the direction that they are showing. When you are in a crisis, the leadership style requires that you be willing to listen to voices of dissent. You can't be monolithic in your approach, because a crisis is not something that you know exactly how it's going to pan out. And so allowing people, giving the space, the freedom for people to dissent, for people to know that they will be listened to, and for bringing vast array of information. These are the kinds of ways that women on a daily basis lead at the different levels they even lead. Not to talk of at a national level. Women tend to be collaborative. And so a problem is identified. They want to find as many other people as possible that can join them in solving the problem. So those skills are in demand. So when you look at Namibia, where you've got this female prime minister, or you look at Rwanda, where you've got a large concentration of women. Rwanda is the leading country on our continent with some 68% of political representation by women. You would find that all of these skills work in a situation like this. So we do need to pick the lessons of this and say to ourselves, how do we then do adaptation? How do we, knowledge is fungible. We can move this set of knowledge that we have gained in terms of the capacity of women to use their leadership skills to manage crisis, and for us to then scale it up for the continent as a whole. And as you know, our entire continent could be defined as a crisis environment, because we are the continent that is left with majority of world's extreme poverty. That is crisis in of itself. Our educational attainment, more children, more than 70% of the children out of school in the world are on our continent. That's crisis. And so we can take all of what we're gaining and use it as our tool for engaging our society to push the barriers that still make it impossible for women to enter into space. I am not asking for us to, blackmail people and be soapy and sentimental. We've got to use a lot of data and analytics as a basis to show the evidence that when women lead, that society improves. Africa needs to improve quickly. Therefore, more African women must get into places of leadership at all spheres, in all spheres of life and at all levels.
Thank you very much. And one of the exciting things is actually that there are quite a number of studies right now going on the effectiveness of the female leadership in dealing with this crisis. I know that 2 UK economists have just published a paper scrutinizing and looking at the data around this so that we could systematically know the difference between female leadership and male leadership, especially in time of crisis, which all these outcomes that you've mentioned are things that contribute to that. I'm now going to hand over to Eddie, who is going to handle the questions that we're getting from the listeners and audiences. But I want to say thank you so much for letting me be a part of this. Thank you so much for being so passionate and contributory regarding the different issues we're talking about today. Thank you. And Eddie, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Biola. So we're receiving quite a few questions from the audience. Thank you for your patience and participation. The first question I'll forward to Ka, and it's coming from participants tuning in from South Sudan, Kenya, and Southern DRC, and it's on the question of resilience. So the women speak of resilience fatigue. There's been tremendous violence against women during the COVID-19 pandemic, violence from the police, domestic violence in the home, and women feeling excluded from the responses and the political and communal processes to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19. What message do you have from women who are feeling at their limits in this very difficult time?
Thank you very much. And for our DRC colleagues, also for my colleague Ambassador Umusal Sek that I see online, and some of my Cameroonian colleagues, I'm going to respond in French so that we get a little bit more French in the conversation. Donc, ce que je pourrais dire par rapport à la résilience, et je crois que vous avez tout à fait raison. Vous avez tout à fait raison. J'ai mentionné qu'on est un peu trop résilient. Et ce que je dirais aux femmes qui sont impliquées dans les mouvements sociaux, qui sont en train d'apporter des réponses à travers des ONG, à travers des associations, c'est que même si vous n'êtes pas prêt à entrer dans la sphère politique, je comprends bien que c'est pas facile, il est important de engager avec le système politique. Donc, il est important à votre niveau de vous organiser, de documenter, comme Obi vient de dire, de documenter, d'avoir des faits, d'avoir des statistiques avec lesquelles vous pouvez approcher les décideurs politiques. Ça peut être le maire de votre ville, ça peut être le gouverneur de la région. Si vous avez accès au niveau de la capitale à un ministre ou un premier ministre, il faut absolument l'aborder. Mais il est important, ces problèmes ont leur solution entre les mains de ceux qui gèrent la politique. Donc, il est important pour vous de collecter vos informations, de vous organiser en groupe, en plusieurs associations, en plusieurs groupes, et d'aller voir, exiger un rendez-vous avec le décideur politique et engagez-les, mettez la pression pour obtenir des solutions. Voilà ce que je pourrais dire.
Thank you, Ka. Next question I will pass to Hibak Osman, and it's a question around the culture of exclusion of women. So in many societies on the continent, women are excluded either due to cultural norms, religious norms, and so on. How can we kind of translate the commitment and dedication that women have to their communities, their nations, their continent, if there are such strong barriers that have been held in place by tradition for a long time? Thank you.
We are tribal society, we are religious society, we have everything in the book in every society, but we are a society living in one country. If the politicians have, I think we were suffering from the culture of exploiting the difference and never thinking the oneness between us. It's only when we get the right people, you know, to talk about the oneness and the interdependence of our societies that we can really move forward. Because whether you are a Muslim or a Christian or a Jewish or any, it doesn't mean anything. At the end of the day, if my children don't have, you know, if they don't live in safety, if they don't have a school, if they don't have health system, yours also won't. So the most important thing for, I mean, and my, you know, my humble advice to those who really have dared to get involved in politics or in community mobilization is that you have to emphasize the oneness and the interdependence. Like one community will not go forward if the other community are not going. In my own country, in Somalia or in Sudan or any country that you know, have problems in the societies and civil wars and all that, no one is winning. And there is a reason for that, because every politician has cut their little village to fight against the other village, and we will have 100 villages burned to the ground and no one is going to win. So until, again, politics for many people is a luxury. You know, when you think of politics, you think, oh my God, you have to have the money, we need to understand and make it more simplified and translate it into the everyday reality of people. It's about schools, it's about wealth, it's about the water, it's about the health. You see, it's the crisis that's happening. Today, if we get in any given country, when we start having this vaccines, you know, it's going to go to the rich. And those who are more equal than others in any society. And most likely women who are at the forefront of the crisis, managing the crisis, might be the last who will get it. So the point is we need to get ahead of time, because I think we have just learned how to sort of dwell ourselves on the misery that are around us. We need to learn to get out of that misery and understand the power. You know, power is not fleeing your country and doing this. We need to we need to inspire young people. People are not going to be just inspired. People need to believe in tomorrow. You see, you know, hope has been killed. Somebody's from South Sudan. Hope has been killed. When South Sudan was getting its independence from the North Sudan, there was a future. So my whole thing is we have to get involved. We have to make people understand the interdependence, that one of us would not, we're all, you know, it reminds me of that song, you know, if we're all in, no one's going to, if we're all in chains, we're not going to win. We have to all, you know, start working together. So I think, honest to God, I don't have an answer. I think it's more complicated. It, you know, varies from one area to another, but the most important thing is like, we have got to work together. And I think politicians, I think that's why women are very important to get involved in this, because they are married to one group and they were born to another group. They are, you know, the children are always playing together, even in the practical ways. Women have, they really, I don't want to use the word resilience, but I think they're very practical. And I think they are the only ones who can really bring, you know, and of course few friendly men also, but they can really, women, you know, have a tendency to bring communities together. So I think that's very important, that we have to go beyond all these wars and all this, you know, problems, and come together just for the sake of, not because we are, you know, going to love each other, but the point is, it's just out of practical, you know, means, you know, that's it.
Thank you very much, Hibak. We have a question here from Sonia Dutal in Angola, and it's on the economy. She speaks of the informal economy. Most African countries, a significant percentage of women are heads of the household and live off the informal economy. The pandemic has affected these women a lot, and no government has found a viable solution to this question. How can women be resilient when they're so dependent on an informal economy? Obi, might you have some response to this?
You know, that's a question that all of Africa has to grapple with, which is that we enter the crisis already in crisis, because a large percentage of those in poverty and locked in informal economy are women. More than 60% of them are women. And therefore, there is now a fiercer sense of urgency that must prevail across our continent, because when other continents recover in growth and our continent continues to struggle, then we're going to drop even more women into poverty. So the way out of this is that our economic policies must reflect what data is showing to us. And you know, one very important way to get people, to lift people out of poverty, is to improve their opportunities for higher productivity activities. And now with COVID, it means that you have to find solutions that are different from previous solutions. And so what Carl was saying about local innovations and how, you know, we respond to the new kinds of needs that communities have could be a place to start. Most of government's economic policy toward post-COVID recovery are not gendered enough. We need to get many more of these countries to take a gender lens into the way that they are allocating budget to priorities and the solutions, policy solutions that they are proposing. And then women who are active in the development space, this is the opportunity they have to be the voices of this large concentration of women who are shut off the economic space. The third part of it is that those who, the women, this is time for more collaboration. Small is no longer beautiful. They need to partner more. There needs to be scale in the activities that they do. And number 4 is that we need to prepare our women for the digital economy. This pandemic and the kinds of behavior modification that it requires would willy-nilly affect women in the informal sector. So how do we invest into the kind of women for technology, technology for women, activities that would enable them act as cooperatives that can engage in the digital economy? These are all the things that we would have to do. But first, we need to keep them alive. And therefore, the basic social protection and social safety net that governments are announcing, a very important thing for it is for it to be well governed. There's too much corruption that's going on in the COVID economic response resources, and it is women that suffer when there's too much stealing of the public wealth. It is time to make it more productive. It is time to make it accountable, and time for women to demand transparency in the governance of those resources so that more women will have access to the kind of resources they need to keep their families alive. As you know, every time that a dollar enters the hand of a woman, some 70 to 80% of it would go toward ensuring that the household is in a good place. And so we can't afford to let women down on our continent any further.
Thank you very much, Obi, for those powerful words. The next set of questions focuses on this on this challenge of breaking into the halls of leadership, particularly in politics. And I'll ask maybe for each of the panelists to briefly speak to this question. Where do you derive your inspiration, your drive, your motivation, despite all the challenges you face? Ka, would you go first, and then Hibak, then Obi?
You knew exactly the person to ask to go first. Ka is crazy.
So there's that. There's just what Obi just said. You need a little bit of crazy. You should have a little bit of crazy. You know, there's a fabulous quote by Thomas Sankara that I love, which he said, "We must be mad enough to dare to invent the future." And I think we must be mad enough. We must have enough madness in our heads to imagine that this is not our lot, that this is not what we were put here on this earth for. This Africa that we are living now is not okay. And one of my driving forces is that I have anger. I'm sorry, I have anger that my country, which is so rich, should have so many people living in abject poverty. I have anger at the way that COVID-19 is managed in a country where we could have avoided most of it from the start. We definitely did not need to let it get to this extent. And today we are amongst the most infected countries on the continent. So I think that anger is important. You need to channel it, you need to fuel it, you need to direct it towards concrete action. The second thing I would say for inspiration, especially to a lot of young women watching us out there and listening out there, is that know your history. Know your history as a Black African woman. My heroines are Amina of Zaria from the 14th century in what is today northern Nigeria. They are Zinga, Queen Zinga in what is today Angola, but they are also Obi Esikwesili that I follow, that I watch, and that I've had the opportunity to engage with. I think that there are so many outstanding women leaders in our history. In my personal Cameroonian history, I discovered that women in the 1940s and 1950s wrote over 1,000 letters to the United Nations. And when I read that, I said to myself, what am I doing? These women had no internet. They had no cell phones. You know, they had to send these letters by boat, and they still did it. They still engaged with the system and did it. So my inspiration is both the historical outstanding African women, but it's also the everyday women, you know, Elizabeth Nkwaz and the Bergeline Dumus who are on this call and who get arrested with me in Cameroon because they want political change. So I think look around you and you will find the inspiration.
Maybe we'll go next to Nela, if you could kindly, where you derive your inspiration.
Moi, mon engagement dans la vie publique d'une manière générale, hein, pas seulement en politique, c'est vraiment ma conviction profonde qu'on ne peut pas changer un pays si ses enfants ne sont pas impliqués dans ce changement. Je suis une enfant de l'école publique, hein, du système d'éducation publique en Tunisie, et qui a permis dans les années 60 et 70 à toute une génération de faire un saut de qualité. Et on ne peut pas transmettre à nos enfants moins que ce que nos parents nous ont transmis. Donc c'est un devoir, je considère que pour moi c'est un devoir véritablement d'être engagé dans la vie publique pour améliorer la société, quelles que soient les difficultés. Hein. Je vous ai parlé des difficultés que nous sommes en train de vivre, mais ça ne veut pas dire qu'on doit baisser les bras. Au contraire, ces difficultés sont un challenge et une motivation pour aller de l'avant et pour essayer de transformer les choses et ne pas rester les bras croisés et dire voilà, il y a des difficultés, il y a des problèmes et on ne fait rien. Non, au contraire, ce sont ces difficultés-là qui font que je suis vraiment convaincue qu'il faut s'impliquer dans la vie publique, soit dans le domaine associatif, soit dans la vie politique pure et dure, c'est-à-dire aller aux élections, chercher les voix et entrer soit au Parlement, soit dans le gouvernement. Il ne faut jamais accepter la situation et rester sur le bord de la route et se lamenter. Au contraire, c'est ça la motivation la plus profonde.
Thank you very much, Nela. Hibak?
Of course, I agree with everyone and what they have said, but I think we really have, you know, a lot of problems, not only internal problems in our countries, but external problems. We have legacies of colonialism. We have countries that are just basically pushing weapons in our countries, exploiting and exacerbating the wars that we are having, then turning around and telling us you need democracy and human rights and justice. One room they're talking, you know, they're telling us that they are working on the peace, you know, issues and for the countries. The other room they're selling the weapons. That is that problem we have to deal with at the international level. We have got to stop countries fueling the problems in our countries. We have problems of corruption. We have problems of education. We have many problems. The most important thing and the inspiration is, yes, for any feminist or any woman, a little madness is important, because the society is always telling you, you can't do this and you can't do that. You have got to be a little bit crazy because you are taking a chance. You are not a leader until you take a chance, and you are not a leader until you know that you absolutely, you know, that to take a chance and to be ready that you are going to lose, you know, a lot sometimes in many societies and in many countries. So taking a chance and taking a risk always is important to lead your society. The other important, I think, thing is you have to have an agitation. You have to have a devotion. You have to believe something can change, but no one can, you know, can change anything by themselves. You have to have enough compassion for your people. This is so important, and that's not something difficult for women to have that compassion, you know, and belief and trust and all that. So it's a combination of different things, but the most important thing is to have an imagination and to have a hopefulness and to bring young people around. I think our time is up, you see, but I hopefully the young people will take from there. So what I would say is just believe that things can be better always. Believe, value yourself, and you know, and that you know, things can change and they have to change, and we can be better than we are. So I think that's where I would just leave.
Thank you very much, Ibak. I'll turn to Obi, and to your remarks, if you can consider this point that keeps coming up a few times, and it has to do with handling women who sabotage other women. So I've seen it a few times in the chat, but where do you get your inspiration? And if you could maybe reflect on that last question. Obi, I think you're on mute.
Right. So I'll start with the depression question and then go to the inspiration question. So the depressing question is women who subvert other women. I think that this is one of the famous social cliches that have been sewn into the minds of women to think that you should basically accept that another woman is going to try to subvert your effort. It's unresearched. There is not yet any pieces of analytical evidence on the basis of which we can say that this thing is a truism or it's a fact. And so we have to be careful about it. I think that what we need to do is to educate women more and more to understand the power of collaboration. When we do power of collaboration, when we get women to understand how, you know, achieving scale and how amplifying voice can be a better solution than fighting for a little piece of the corner just for yourself, we will do better in that regard to douse this whole thing that I think is really a good tool that is used to create a divide and rule situation all the time. But in terms of countering this, I need to say that when I was, you know, when I ran for presidency, women were the ones that championed my cause. I had more women at the table who were members, you know, who volunteered for my run. They were charged up and they really gave their all to it, in whether it was in financial contribution, in knowledge, in partnerships, in building networks. Women really came out and supported my run. And so we need to engage with our sisters with the right kind of messaging. And we need to also communicate better amongst ourselves as women and be transparent as possible so that the other woman knows exactly why it is that you're doing what you're doing and how it, you know, really generally affects other women, children, and the rest of society. So I would say be open-minded. Don't go into relationship with women with that at the back of your mind, they are going to subvert me. Otherwise, a self-fulfilling prophecy has already been declared. And then the second question as to my inspiration, I want to say my name is Obi Ezekwesili. I endorse all the message of my sisters on this panel because they have so well spoken in terms of inspiration. I think the one thing that I would like to add, or maybe two, one is that my parents told me that whenever you are privileged, you have no business luxuriating in your privilege. You must use your privilege for those who are without that privilege. And so this has been a maxim in my life. Every time in my life, I'm thinking in terms of I am privileged. And what did my father define as privilege? Access to quality education. That is what has given me social and economic mobility. And therefore, I must consistently fight for a society that accords that to every other child who is right now stuck in an intergenerational legacy of poverty. So privilege must be used for those without, by those of us who've got it. And then the second thing is, you know, I am a strong believer in the divine purpose. you know, I totally, and it's not just because I'm a pastor's wife or because I'm a pastor, but I don't think we came here to just have a good time. I actually think that we're purposeful beings. If you're a purposeful being and you're on the continent of Africa and you see a continent with so much possibilities, being a laggard, you should be, like Carr said, angry. But you should be, you know, you should be effective anger. Anger that pushes you forward to do something to solve that thing which upsets you. And so when I look around the continent and I see the misalignment of our potentials and the results we're producing, I am gingered every day. I am triggered by that effective anger to doing one more thing that could push the tide in the direction of an inclusively prosperous society, a society that is not you know, stuck in ignorance, and to become a society that can, you know, compete with the rest of the world. I think that I want to return the compliment and say that Ka, my youngest sister, is definitely an inspiration, and she should be an inspiration to everybody, because Ka is so bold and courageous. She wouldn't stop, you know. And I want to end on the note that if you're a young woman listening to me, there's nothing to fear. Absolutely nothing to fear. Because in all the barriers that we've been speaking about, we haven't talked about the one where you impose that limitation on yourself, so that even if all the social and other structural issues are removed, you're still looking at yourself and thinking, oh, you're suffering from imposter syndrome. There is no reason to suffer from that. You are powerful. You are everything that you can be. So go ahead and be fearless. I love courageous young women. I vote for them all the time. And I know that they can do mighty things on this continent. And I'm just waiting for that moment when it begins to happen.
Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. I want to say thank you to the Yale African Women Network for really setting this up and bringing these amazing people together to motivate, inspire, and kick us a little bit to get angry. Ka, thank you for being here. Auntie Obi, thank you. Naila, thank you for your time. Hiba, thank you for challenging all of us. I think really some of the main takeaways today is that women lead differently, and we've seen the benefit of women leadership from a communication perspective to fearlessness and decisiveness, and also gaining trust. And societies that have women in leadership, once again, shows you the type of equity and gender balance that we're looking for globally. And the other part of this is really about all of us. There's an activist in all of us, and we just need to get angry enough. We need to have a little bit of craziness in us to innovate and to take action. So with that, I'm going to say, just as in memory of John Lewis, as he would say, let's get in some good trouble. And as Ka would say, let's get a little crazy. And Auntie Obi says, let's get angry. And Hikba says, if you want to stay relevant, get in the game. So with that, I'm going to leave us all with the challenge of getting action done in Africa. So once again, thank you everyone for being here. Let's go and create change on the continent.